So we had a minor setback, but I'm going to finish the book with you, and then I'll give you a book rating. 298. He slid the ring into her finger and kissed it hungrily. Is that a yes? He asked softly. She laughed and caught him around the neck and kissed him with even more fever than skill. It was a yes, she whispered, and she said nothing else for a very long time. Page 299. There was a solemn memorial service for Memorial and Clancy's grandfather at the Methodist Church in Jacobsville. It was well attended because a lot of older residents of the county remembered Deputy Sheriff Dalton Reed. The urns contained both sets of remains that were buried in the cemetery next to Clancy's mother and father. She shook her hands with Reverend Blair and reminisced with people who later known her grandfather. Later, she and Coulter stood back from the small graves in the cold wind. He was a terrific grandfather, Clancy said quietly, and I loved him even more than my mother and father. He put an arm around her and drew her close. I'm so sorry you lost him in the way you did. She nodded. I'm sorry Morris turned out to be such a bad man. If Ben had been a better father, if he hadn't spoiled Morris to death, he might have turned out differently. That's a hard call, Coulter said. We can't go back. We have to go forward. 298, 299, 300, and 301. She looked up at him. Forward sounds very good. When are you going to marry me? He pursed his lips. How about Saturday at the Methodist Church? And if you don't mind, I'm going to invite the lieutenant. I'm hoping he'll give us Monday and Tuesday off so we can have a nice long honeymoon. Where are we going to go on our honeymoon? She asked. He chuckled. Galveston, to the beach. It's too cold to swim in, but the scenery is terrific. That suits me just fine, she said, and hugged him secretly. She was still a little worried that she'd gone to the doctor 2 days before and been examined. The visit had required a little minor surgery, which was still a little sensitive, but by the weekend she'd be all healed up and ready for adventure with her new husband. Hopefully she could stop being afraid of what would happen. She was all nerves already. Well, she told herself that women had been doing it for thousands of years. It was natural. She was just going to have to think of it that way. The wedding was well attended. Clancy wore a white dress and a hat with a veil, carried it with a bouquet of white roses. Friends set up the refreshments in the church fellowship hall as well. Clancy said her vows, watched her brand new husband lift the veil and look at her black eyes so full of affection they made her knees weak. He kissed her very softly. Then they ran down the aisle to the showered with the white rose petals all the way out the door. They fed each other cake. The photographers taken visited with guests and climbed into Coulter's big SUV back to his house and changed clothes for the drive to Galveston. Tad was already staying with Brenda at the apartment in San Antonio, so there was nobody in the house. Coulter had taken Clancy's suitcase full of clothes to the ranch the night before so that they'd have everything packed for the trip. He packed well. Page 304 to 305. And you were worried that nobody would want you with your so-called baggage, he chided. That's what I thought, she agreed. Then I got sick. He smiled. You'll never know how much I enjoyed taking care of you, he grimaced, or how jealous I was of Cal Hollister, he added. Cal's like my brother, she said lazily. You know that now. Of course I know that now, but I did not know that then, he emphasized. He's a good cop. I like him a lot. He likes you too. Nice of the lieutenant to give us those 2 days off, he said, changing the subject. I wish it was warm weather. You could wear a bathing suit and I could just lie on the beach and look at you and fend off other men. Flatterer, she teased. He bent and kissed her. Don't you even know that you're beautiful, Clancy? He whispered. Because you are, inside and out. I'm not, but I'm glad you think so. I think you're the most gorgeous man I ever saw in my whole life, and I still can't believe I'm married to you. He chuckled. I can. He pursed his lips. I've got scratches on my butt to remind me. She hit him. Oh, you, she exclaimed. He just grimaced. Let's go to the long drive to Galveston. Not so long if you have good company on the ride, she replied. Just what I was thinking, he said, and then he went to get the suitcases. 304, 305. I'm trying to see where I continue at. They had a great honeymoon, walked on the beach hand in hand, visited all the touristy places, mostly stayed in the hotel room, explored each other. By the time they got home, they were closer than they ever been, like two halves of a whole. Clancy moved down the ranch to Tad and invited the Martins to move into the house Morris owned. Their little own house was falling apart. The roof leaked. The plumbing was failing, along with the wiring. They accepted it gratefully, insisted on paying rent. Clancy agreed to save pride, but said amount of the figure that they could easily afford. That was nice of you to let the Martins live in the house, Brenda commented when she came down on the weekend to visit with Coulter and Clancy and Tad. A house needs to be lived in, Clancy said simply, and they're such sweet people. 304, 305, 306. But yes, they are. Brenda cocked her head and looked at him. She smiled. You look good together. Thanks, Coulter chuckled. Grace went back to South America for 2 days. She continued. She made a face. After reminding me again that nice women don't ever wear short skirts. Nice men don't carry guns either, Coulter mused, or so she said. You are so nice, Clancy replied and hugged him close. He wrapped his long arms around her. I'm glad you think so, honey. I think you're nice too, Coulter, Tad said with a grin. He came into the living room with both Miss Kitty and Bumblebee, the kitten. They followed him everywhere now. When I grow up, I'm going to be a Texas Ranger just like you. I'm very flattered, Coulter said, and he smiled at the boy. How's the homework coming along, he added. Oh, Coulter, it's just Saturday, he groaned. And if you get your homework done, you can have your game all weekend, Coulter returned. I didn't think of that, Tad laughed. Okay, he ran back down to the hall room of his room. The cats galloped after him. Oh, you have a way with kids, Brenda remarked gaily. She studied them. You two gonna have kids? They nodded. They smiled. I'm always available to babysit, she replied with a big smile. Remember that, Coulter promised. We'll have another cat who needs housing, Brenda began. We have 2 cats, pointed out. She sighed. The more the merrier, she asked hopefully. Suppose we think about it, Clancy asked, and just sighed as she snuggled close to her husband. We can think about it, he agreed. Brenda grinned, sorry. They had a new kitten and an uproarious birthday celebration for Clancy the first week of December when she turned 24. A wonderful Christmas celebration with 9-foot artificial tree and company of lots of presents. Then 3 months later, Clancy came home on Saturday morning after an appointment with Dr. Louise Coltrane. Look, I don't know, worried, Coulter said, taking her gently by the shoulders. Is something wrong? He added, and now he looked worried too. The rabbit died. His eyebrows arched. You killed a rabbit? It's a figure of speech, she began. You know, a metaphor. Is there a reason you're giving me this metaphor? Sort of. What do you mean, sort of? She smiled secretly. Well, Dr. Coltrane is sending me to see a specialist. He lost color. What sort of specialist? A woman who does obstetrics. All at once he got it. Dead rabbit metaphor obstetrician. You're pregnant, he exclaimed. She grinned. Yes. Page 308. He picked her up, kissed her, and then kissed her well. Walking around the room in an absolute fever of joy, Tad came in the door out from outside where he'd been helping the foreman feed the bottle calves. He stopped and just stared at them. They stopped and stared back. What are you doing? He asked curiously. Celebrating, Coulter said. Celebrating, Clancy added. Celebrating what? The coming of occupancy of our spare bedroom, Clancy told him mischievously. We're taking in renters, Tad obviously didn't get it. We're putting in a bassinet and diapers. We're going to have a baby, Tad burst out, radiant. A real baby. Oh my gosh, that's just great. I won't be an only child anymore. He hugged Coulter, who still had Clancy up in his arms, and they all laughed. The following Christmas, besides the colorfully wrapped presents under the big tree, there was another present that capped the spirit and celebration of joy. Clancy and Coulter brought home the newest member of the household, their son, Jacob Dalton Coulter Banks. He was, Clancy's told her delighted husband, the nicest Christmas present she ever had in her life. Smiling, he bent and kissed her so sweetly that she felt tears brighten her eyes. She looked back up at him, and her heart was in her eyes, and she smiled back. The book gets a 22. You got to read it. Thank you. God bless.